Had as much of you as I can take. I'm so done, so over being afraid. I've gone through the motions, I've been back and forth. I know that you're thinking you've heard this before. I don't know how to say it, so I'm just gonna say it, yeah. Fear you don't own me, there ain't no room in this story. And I ain't got time for you telling me what I'm not, like you know me. Well, guess what? I know who I am, I know I'm strong, and I am free, got my own identity. So fear you will never be welcome here. Take a minute, let it settle in. You probably never saw it coming. Something's gotta give, so I give up you. Oh, there's no room for you here, yeah, I've had enough. The no vacancy sign on my heart is lit up. In case you didn't hear it, here it is again. Oh, fear you don't own me, there ain't no room in this story. And I ain't
Hello?
I believe we're having some technical issues with our host. I believe we're having technical issues with our host. Please stand by.
Are we on now?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Okay, thank you. I'm so sorry for the technical issues, and I don't know. I'll just start from the top. This is Carol Moulton with Tea Time. We are here once again on a Saturday with Tea Time with Carol, and I apologize for the earlier little glitch that we experienced, but we're good now. I promised you first of all, we're not pouring tea today. We're not pouring tea. We're pouring coffee today. We've got a holiday blend to use up, so that's what we're pouring today. But come on in, get comfy, fluff up the pillows, draw close, and get ready for a real blessing. We've got a person who has been here before, Reverend Jason Moore. But before I bring him in, I want to keep a promise that I made to you. I promised last week that every Saturday this month we would begin our broadcast with a quote from Maya Angelou. And so the quote for today is this. This is really interesting, and I think it dovetails perfectly with what we'll be talking about today. We delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty. So let me read it again so you really get it. We delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty. So today we're going to be talking about living in the meaning. A lot of us, I'm going to talk for myself. There are some times when I feel burned up, burned out, really just going through the motions. I frequently hear church folks saying, you got to fake it until you make it. And, that's not always the best approach. And so our guest today has got some real words of wisdom when you feel kind of down and out, where when you're feeling like, your to-do list is endless and the zeal and the fun has gone out of everything, and even church, even things that you normally enjoy have gone kind of bland and horrible. You just feel like from sun up to sundown, you're just trudging through, going through the motions, and you feel like a crispy critter. You've just been burned up. You've got no juice left, no praise, and you're just tired to the very, very bone. So what do you do when you're feeling like that? And I'm going to call on Pastor Jason Moore, who's going to give us a word and some direction and some things that he's discovered that will really change and electrify your life and make a true difference, a true difference. Pastor Moore, you with me?
Yes, I am. Thanks so much for having me again on the show.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing to come. I was fascinated by the writing, Live in the Meaning. And, just to set the stage, would you tell our listeners what that means? What are you talking about? Live in the meaning. What does that? What are we talking about here?
Absolutely. Just thinking about how much information comes at us on a daily basis, how much information is, we're learning on a daily basis through Google, through just the internet, just through life itself. There's so much coming at us, and we can kind of live in this society where everything is measured and, definitions, everything can be so concise, even in our Christian walk. And we can come to a place where we are speaking the words, but not really touching the life behind the words. And especially in our Christian faith, we can have a concise answer, but not really touch Jesus behind the words. And you said it so beautifully, the fake it till you make it. That's so much in our world today, where we're just going through the routine, but we're not touching the power. We're not touching the ministry behind the Word of God. And I think as Christians, that is the key to longevity. That's the key to communion. That's the key to continuing, where we must go beyond the knowledge and actually enter into the meaning of what we're doing, the why behind the what, if I could say, the really the life behind the Word, the person behind the ministry that we're talking about. That's just the core thought there.
That is awesome. That is really, really awesome. And I think a lot of us have gotten used to, we hear the word, when we've gotten used to kind of skating over it and not allowing it to always permeate, and really go deep. And I really appreciate your inviting us to take another look. But you said just now, allowing us to touch Jesus or Jesus to touch us, and whichever way you said it. And, I would like to go a little bit further with that. How do we do that? How can we, get beyond the veil, if you will?
Sure. I mean, there's no real formula, but a few thoughts we could say is Psalm 16:8 is a verse that's been in my mind, where the psalmist said, "I've always set the Lord before me, because he's at my right hand, I shall not be moved." So that gives us the indicator of just concentration, being able to put him before us and not just take a glimpse, but to really behold him, to really concentrate, and to slow it down to a place where we're worshiping him. And then it just goes beyond the measurable into the immeasurable, because it takes us to a place where, Lord, I don't want to just have an accumulation of knowledge. I want to enter into worship. I want to enter into your presence. And then setting him before our face really leads to a place of meditation and then ultimately communion, which may sound like a big things in one sense, but really it's just putting emphasis on his presence in our lives. And then what happens is that knowledge turns to worship, and then that worship turns to power, and that power turns into empowerment. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, ministry really happens in us before it happens through us. So it's really powerful. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, and beautifully said. You said something that I think is equally powerful in your writing. You said Jesus wants us to go beyond what we think we know and enter a mystery. I love that, because we think we know a lot. I know a lot of folks who can quote the Bible from Genesis to the maps, but it's another level to go to enter in, to get beyond just the words that are printed on the page, but to enter into the mystery, and therein is the intimacy that I think you were talking about. Would you agree? And would you would you tell me your definition of intimacy, and what does that look like? How do we get to that place?
Well, I love the play on words that the word intimacy can connotate, but it says, look into me and see, is maybe a kind of an interesting way of thinking of intimacy, that personalness, that transparency that we all desire, even in relationships, when it's personal, when there's really an exchange, then there's meaning, there's a depth to the relationship. It's no longer just an acquaintance. There's no longer indifference where I could take it or leave it, but really there's a commitment. There's a real there's skin in the game, as they say. There's really a real meaning to it. So when we think about intimacy with God, it comes at a price, and that means simply that we're wholly vested, or there's a real concentration where we say, Lord, I am setting you before my face. Psalm 42:1, my heart is panting after you. There's a real vulnerability, a transparency, or an honesty. These are gigantic words where our heart is exposed, and we're saying, Lord, love me. Lord, I'm Psalm 12:1. I am crying out to you, saying, help, Lord. There's no games. There's a real honesty before God in 10:22 of Hebrews, where we are raw before the Lord, and God says, oh, good, now I'm getting to the meat of the matter. I'm getting to the heart of the matter. I'm getting to the real you. And then his word becomes alive. And then his word goes just beyond a Bible verse text. It goes beyond a pious platitude, but it really becomes a relationship. It becomes an absolute lifeline. And that mystery that Paul said, I want to open my mouth wide and speak a mystery. This is really when things change. This is when dry bones in Ezekiel 37 become living again. This is when dead areas become flourishing gardens. And resurrection life really happens at this place.
But what I hear you saying is that it really starts with a sacrifice of your time in order to achieve that real intimacy where you can take off the mask. And I think we've gotten really good with the churchy mask. praise the Lord, everything's wonderful, blessed, highly favored. And, and not to, I'm certainly not making light, but I think that it's difficult a lot of times to admit to anyone what we're going through. If we look just at the shutdown, the government shutdown over the past couple of weeks, I know many, many, many people who were very much affected by not having a paycheck for 35 days. And, there was still a real difficulty in, being able to admit, that they struggled. I know people who couldn't afford to come back when the shutdown was over. They couldn't afford to come back to work until they got paid because they didn't have enough gas to drive to work. So, but that, there was an element of pride there. I don't want people to think that, I'm this low. But, I looked at the shutdown in terms of, and I'm going to talk about this in a future broadcast, the blessings of the furlough. Because I think it was difficult for a lot of people on a number of different levels, but it also, if you're open to it, can take you to another level in God, where God is your source, not the government. God is the ultimate sayer, not, your paycheck. And I think it will take some, because we're looking at another shutdown and, at the end of this week coming. And so I think, there is an opportunity to draw, to draw closer, to pull more from him if we take that opportunity. Because maybe we've been a little bit too complacent, with having a regular paycheck. I mean, we've been accustomed to a certain standard of living. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I'm saying maybe there's an opportunity in that desert to find something more in him. What do you think?
Absolutely. And that was tragic that, the government shut down for that period of time. And whenever the routine is disturbed, whenever the predictable becomes unpredictable, whenever life kind of surprises us, we see our need for God all over again. And that's a good place. It's not a comfortable place. It can be very painful, and pain can certainly eclipse our living. But you're so right in what you said, is that God says, I'm in your storm. And as you beautifully illustrated at the beginning of the broadcast with the butterfly, the transformation did not happen in a peaceful place or a comfortable place. There was a great sacrifice that happened where that transformation happened, where the butterfly, moved from the larvae to this beautiful masterpiece. And I think that's God's intent in our life, is that if our attention is not grabbed or seized, then events will eventually get us to that place where we cry out and say, God, maybe you're my last resort here, but now you have my attention. And I just feel like, in our Western world, that may, it takes a process sometimes to get our attention. But God says, I have so much for you, more than just, fighting for the scraps at the table. I have a full meal. I have so much prepared for those, eye hath not seen nor ear heard, nor has it entered into the heart of man that which God hath prepared for those that love him. I think of that beautiful verse in Corinthians.
Absolutely. There were a couple of other things that you said that I'd like to take a deeper dive into as well. You said, and I love this, it's one thing to read something by an author. It's another when you know the author and he addresses you by name. how does that fall for you?
And Carol, if you don't mind, just for our listeners, just a shout out, this blog is on lifelettercafe.com if they wanted to tune into that, lifelettercafe.com, and it's called Live in the Meaning, if they want to get that piece. But what I thought about in particularly was Mary at the tomb. You know, there she was after Jesus was laid in the tomb those 3 days, and she's crying there. And she comes to the tomb, and the stone is rolled away, and she's looking in and doesn't really know what happened to her Savior. And, you know, she has that interaction with who she thought was the gardener. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it doesn't really say how intently she was listening to the gardener until he said her name, Mary. And that's when, you know, she calls out Lord and Master. And I just think when we really catch the personal love of God, the personal nature of God, when our imperfections really teach us about the unconditional nature of God, then we're broken. Our attention is seized, and then that's really when things begin to change. And the author and finisher of our faith in Hebrews 12:1 and 2, the author and finisher, that's a powerful title. Like, he writes it and he does it. So what's our role? I mean, our role is to believe it, really. In 6:29 of John, we're believing him. We're learning to trust him. We're learning to walk with him. And this is why I'm amazed personally at the patience and goodness of God, because I would have given up on me a long time ago. It's incredible how patient and good he is, and just to think that his great grace is just constantly poured out. And I think when we understand that he's writing his story in us, and you know, we just discover, oh Lord, how much I need you, how much your wisdom is so much greater than my wisdom. And this is what living in the meaning is all about. Is it's not about definition only. I mean, that's definitely part of it. We all have our intrinsic dictionaries, how we define things by how we're raised and our experience and our education and life experiences, which are very, very good. They're very, very important. But the mystery says, I need to lead you beyond in the immeasurable place where I show you a mystery. Because life doesn't make sense without the mystery. Marriage doesn't make sense without mystery. Our calling, our vocation does not make sense without the mystery. And what we mean by that is seeing and beholding Christ, and him showing us the eternal perspective, the eternal value in what we're doing, in what we're a part of. Yeah, I could start preaching here, but I want to pause here. Does that make sense?
That was beautiful. And, you know, I was just thinking of the person who's struggling to identify with what you've said. You know, when you're there, you're there. But when you struggle with your internal voice, and when you look around and you think you have nothing to offer, you know, you're looking at all your mistakes and all your problems, and, you know, maybe you were abused as a child, or maybe you grew up with great difficulty, and you're trying to figure out, why would the creator of the universe want anything to do with me? You know, that I think sometimes becomes a hindrance that is difficult to find the answer. And I think what you've touched on is certainly cracking the door open to the answer for a lot of folks. You know, if you're not finding it in church, if your prayers feel like they're just bouncing off the walls, if you're listening to sermons and they're just not connecting, well, then maybe that's the time to start having that personal conversation with Christ where you're going beyond the printed word and entering into that mystery, where I don't understand it, but I'm with you. I don't get it. I don't know why you'd want to have anything to do with me, but okay, I'm going along with it. Because you just when you have to, sometimes you just have to get to the end of yourself, to be able to, because as long as your ego is leading the way, it's difficult to, and especially if you're trying to make sense of it, because there are many things that Christ said that don't make sense from a rational, standpoint, from the world's viewpoint, I'll say it that way. Like the last shall be first and the first shall be last, those kinds of things that Christ said, and I think he's inviting us in with all of those things, just come closer. Don't focus on the negative. Don't worry about what happened yesterday. Just look at me. Here I am. Just look at me, and I'm the mystery. Just keep thinking about me. One thing that I do, and I'll just share this, and maybe it will resonate with someone. When I drive to work every morning, that's my true meditation time. And as I'm driving, I'm looking at the clouds or looking at the weather, and every day I find something to say to the Lord. I really like the way you did this today. I like the way, I'll say, and I think the Lord appreciates my humor. I'll say something like, I really like what you've done with the place today. The trees are particularly beautiful. They're a particularly beautiful color today. Or the clouds, that blue, if I could find a dress that color, I'd be fit. But just something where I'm saying something very specific and very personal, and just meditating on who the Lord is. And I do this every day, just every morning as I'm driving. I'm focused on him. And sometimes I'm talking out loud. Sometimes it's an internal conversation. Sometimes I'm talking out loud. And since everybody is talking on their phone now, nobody thinks I'm crazy as I'm driving along, because everybody's doing the same thing. Everybody's, got their cell phone connected to the radio or whatever, but it's not looking crazy anymore to see people talking in the car and they're alone. But I think it's, if you really want to, and I'm by no means saying that I have all the answers, but I'm saying in developing a relationship, it does require that you be present to that other person.
Yeah.
Where are you with that, Pastor Jason?
Wow, you said so many great things there. Just to kind of scale back, in a relationship, obviously, you have to be present. It does take time. It does take investment, just like marriage or any relationship. It's a personal investment. You get what you put in it. But just to go back, just to think about these powerful words, because it starts small, and I think it's easy to miss the importance of the small things. And just like habits, we have to start with a decision, and it starts small, and it's those consistent actions where we do it by faith a lot of times, and then God meets us there. And that powerful word, honesty, just talking to God, venting, or even just, obviously worship and thanksgiving are so important. Petition is so important, but just getting to a place where we're even acknowledging and recognizing and just talking to God are such a huge beginning. And then the transparency, not holding back, and just saying, you know what, Lord, I need you to work in my heart, because the fact of the matter is God is doing a work in us and then through us. So many of us want to do a great work for God, and that's great, but really God wants to do a great work in us, and then he does the work beyond us. Otherwise, we're doing the work of God without the Holy Spirit, and that's a disaster. That's just a disaster there. But thinking about it in a very practical way, like you mentioned, if someone was abused or something bad had happened, I think of the abortion crisis happening with this new law, with now a full term, the ability to abort a child at full term, and the tragedy there. Like, those things are so tragic, but God can redeem the waste places in Joel 2:25. He can replace that pain with something precious, something pure. And it starts with focusing and feeding and fellowshipping. These are the three words. So focus, feed, and fellowship. First of all, my attention is fixated on something that's life-giving, right? Feeding, I'm partaking at that table, and then fellowshipping, I'm acting and enjoying and walking in it as if it's true. These three F's, if we could say, really help, I think, turn our hearts away from the shattered glass that keeps cutting us and then moves us into a place of life. And these tragedies make us who we are today because worship is happening. Worship is changing our knowledge into power. And a good verse is 2 Timothy 3:5-7. Maybe we know this, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. And it goes in, for of this sort of they that creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, laden with diverse lusts. And then this is the capstone statement: ever learning but never able to come into the knowledge of the truth. Wow, that's what we're talking about. Like piercing that veil and actually living in that meaning. It's a lifelong pursuit, I think.
Absolutely. And that's, I think, where a lot of us make a mistake, where, we think the pursuit of knowledge, just knowledge for its own sake, is the answer, So, we want, and I've talked to a lot of women about this, who are moving into leadership roles. If you're really interested in becoming a leader, it's not always about having more technical knowledge. Sometimes it's learning about how to lead people, how to minister to them, how to understand the culture. It's all these other things that we don't always consider important, And I think it's the same way that Christ is telling us, and I'm not telling anybody not to go to school. I'm certainly not saying that. But, take it to another level. Learn how, get the knowledge, that's fine, but understand how to apply it. Apply it with, with a humble spirit and not with a sword. Because sometimes we do that too. I've seen a lot of people use the word to cut and not to heal. And that's certainly not the example of Christ, who, I didn't see him cutting down anybody except people who were mistreating folks, but, even folks who were sinners and folks who were, doing all kinds of crazy things, he was still welcoming them to him. He was still going to eat with them and healing them and spending time with them. And I think the same is required of us, So, but I think what you've said is exactly right. Before, let me say it this way, because I think this demonstrates your point. When I was called into ministry, I had a very, very good friend and mentor. She has since gone on to be with the Lord, but she was my best friend in life, par none. And when I told her that, I'd been called into ministry, she was like, what she said to me was, that's nice, but you got to clean up your own house first.
Mm.
And I was devastated, because here I am, chippy, chappy, ready to go preach to the world and tell everybody what they need to do. And every time I said this to her, for the longest time, that was her reply: clean up your own house first. And she was absolutely right. Absolutely. Well, 99% of what she told me, she was absolutely right anyway. But I think that, exactly what you were saying, that allow the Lord to minister and heal the broken places in us before we run out and try to tell anybody else what they need to be doing, because we've got our own internal voice that we're dealing with that, is sometimes very much a struggle. So heal your, straighten out your own, clean up your own house, So
yeah, and do that, how do we do that? I think of Psalm 145, that God heals the brokenhearted. So it's like we come to God as we are, and we pretty much lay ourselves out like Ezra. He laid out the scroll before the Lord, and it's like we just stretch out and say, God, I need you to fill these voids, these broken places. And what happens is, as you know, and as your mentor so rightly said, it's like we can't manage others unless we ourselves are managed in that sense. But we're so honest before the Lord, and then God gives us a song in the night, and that vulnerability kicks in, where there's like a risk, where we have where we're just like, okay, Lord, 4:13 of Hebrews, I am totally spiritually naked before you. See all things. And then God says, I love what I see. And then as we're dealing with people, we hear their story, which is paramount. We learn their story, which shows us the direction. We love them with God's story, which is our ministry, and then lead them beyond themselves, which is our mentorship and discipleship. These are like amazing points where people really see that, they follow the people with the scars, if you could say, and that's when we go beyond just the formula and the technique and the methodology. And just to say, quite frankly, I mean, in this church age, prayer is our most valuable weapon, and worship and communion. These precede a mighty move of God, and we need that in our country desperately. Another move of God. That's just really in my mind and my heart recently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you turn on the news at any point, you'll see how much we're standing in need of God right now. But the promise that I love is from Isaiah, where he gives beauty for ashes. And you bring yourself, the broken and the brokenhearted, the torn down, the one who is struggling, and he says, you give me your ashes, I give you beauty. And somehow that doesn't seem like a fair trade, but God, the author and finisher, considers it fair. You give him that level of honesty, and he gives you beauty in return. And I just think that is so awesome and so profound, that because we're looking in a human kind of way, and he's not. He's so far beyond that.
Yes, like I think of the bruised reed he will not break, and the smoking flax he will not quench. So it's like the person that should have been thrown away in the world standards, God is gathering them. You said earlier, it's like, the blood of Christ covers us. So therefore, when God looks at us today, he sees Jesus Christ, his son, clean and pure and holy. And this is the mystery where we look in the mirror and we have a totally different conclusion. And God is saying, look into the mirror of truth today. Focus on me, not the pain. Let me take the pain. Let me take that bad relationship. Let me take that fear. Let me take that shame. Let me take that guilt and translate it and give you the garment of praise, the spirit of joy. And this is an amazing exchange that starts with focusing and then feeding on the right stuff. And then when we start to feed, or as we could say in Jeremiah 15:16, we begin to ingest the word, what happens? It begins to replace all the craziness, the fragmentation, the splintering, and then we begin to have a new and living way again. And I just want to speak to the person that's brokenhearted today. God never gives up, and his plan is always unfolding, no matter how bad it is. And it usually gets worse before it gets better, but knowing that the plan of God is always unfolding, and walking with him is the only way through the dark night. It really is. And he is a faithful guide. It's incredible. He really
It really is. It really is. And it all starts with this sacrifice of your time.
Yes.
You sacrifice your time, then what you receive, in this unequal exchange, is blessings like streams of living water. You get it in abundance, over and above anything you could ask or think. You're blessed so far beyond measure when you just enter into, and even if it's a struggle right now, there's still a blessing on the other side.
Yeah.
Sometimes I tell people when they're struggling to look at the patterns, because I counsel people on a regular basis, and I'll tell them, if you keep running up against the same problem, if it's the same problem over and over and over again, then the problem is you, not the other person, but you're going to keep running. And this was something that I had to learn for myself. My mentor pointed this out to me, and it was such a big revelation for me that when you keep running up, when it seems that you keep running up against the same problem, there's a lesson in there that you haven't learned. And you're going to keep running up against it. It's going to keep smacking you upside the head until you learn the lesson. And that's sometimes something that we struggle with because we want to be in control. And we think we're in control, but I think the furlough taught a lot of us how little control we actually have. And so part of the sacrifice of your time with God is acknowledging that he's in control. He's the one that keeps the sun shining every day and keeps this earth spinning on its axis and throws the stars up at night. He does that. We don't control anything, really. It's all we can do to control ourselves, and some of us don't do that too well either. So, it's really about getting beyond what we think we know. You said that so beautifully. Getting beyond what we think we know. We think we know the 23rd Psalm. We think we know who God is, but do you really? I just want to challenge our listeners today to go to a deeper place in him, where you're going beyond the prayers that you've memorized, where you're going beyond, the formulaic kind of approach to God. Sometimes we want to reduce everything to a formula, where we pray. I can't remember someone had a formula for prayer. Before you ask, you have to do these 3 steps first. Why ask for anything? Why not just spend some time appreciating who God is? Being grateful that he woke you up this morning, being grateful, for the food in your cupboard, being grateful that there's gas in your car, and if there isn't, being grateful that you're still here. Just being grateful. I think sometimes we struggle with that, and we struggle with our relationships because we really don't know who He is. We really don't.
You nailed it. You nailed it right there. The importance of what we're saying today is what is not personal in my life, we will one day walk away from it. And that's a realization that I've been thinking about, like, what is really, I profess a lot, but what is it that I possess? And if it's not personal, I don't possess it. And this is the importance of what we're saying today, is that, going beyond just the knowledge and just saying, Lord, make this real to me. Lord, I don't know anything as I ought to know it. Being very honest, and then just taking the time. When our pastor is beautiful with us, reading the scripture slowly, like just taking the time with each word and thinking about the word and having the character and nature of God interpret the word, as you said earlier, is so important. But just, I think of Ephesians 3:19. It's like His love goes beyond knowledge. And that's a powerful segment in that verse. His love goes beyond everything He knows that's happened in time or will happen. He goes beyond it, and He is looking forward. He's loving us with a perfect love. And those words, "I love you," are trite words in a lot of contexts today. But in the spiritual, in Christ, when Christ says, "I love you," in Song of Solomon 1:4, the Shulamite woman was desperate to be loved, and interesting verses 4-7. She's taking care of everyone's vineyards. She's taking care of everything except her own vineyard, and she's left alone. She's miserable, and until she turns and takes care of her own vineyard, her own heart, like the song, like Solomon said, and through Proverbs as well, "My son, give me your heart." When she gave him her heart, that's when things became personal. And because, if we want the things of God to touch our heart, what touches God's heart, we want to touch our heart. Like, what touches His heart? Well, souls, people. We see the truth of the words of God, the great love letter that we hold in our hands, that the things that touch His heart would touch our hearts. That's my prayer this new year. Lord, let the things that touch your heart capture my heart, and that's my prayer.
Wow, that's like amazing. Yes, I love the references to women. There are many women in the Bible who can really serve as models for us. The Shulamite woman is certainly one. I love the woman at the well, who, and I think this really dovetails into what we're talking about today. If you're not sure of how to approach God, read the woman at the well, because the first couple of times I read it, I was kind of shocked at the way that she talks to Jesus. It's kind of biting, and challenging, and our Father, our Father at this well, we worshipped our Father at this well, and she's almost taking Him to task in a way, and He takes that arrow and pierces straight to her heart and says, go get your husband and come. And she said, I don't have a husband. He said, yeah, that you've told the truth. You've had sex, and the one you're with now is not your husband. And I just look at that, and it's like, wow. In 2 sentences, he just goes all the way to her core. Because what that told me is, here's a woman woman who's been searching for love and has not been able to find it, and Christ loves her anyway. You know, and there's so many folks in the church who are hurting and staying in bad marriages because they're afraid of what people will say. You know, they're going from relationship to relationship looking for love and not able to find it. And Jesus is saying, I love you anyway. It doesn't matter. It really does not matter. Just look at me, and I will give you that living water. I'm the living water, and you'll never be thirsty again. You'll never have to, you know, go from man to man, from person to person again, because you'll be healed when you pull from me. That changed my life completely. I mean, completely. Because if you feel that you're not enough, you know, that you can't earn, when you're trying to figure out, you know, see, our society is sort of based on performance. You know, you have to earn your way. And Jesus is saying, you can bring your raggedy self. I don't care, you know, how much you've messed up. You just come as you are. And I think that's something that we sometimes miss. And, you know, we put all these conditions on folks, and that's not what he's saying at all, that you're enough just as you are. You don't have to learn more. You don't have to speak a certain way. You don't have to come from the best family, you know, and sometimes they've got problems too. You don't have to turn around 3 times and run backwards. You don't have to do any of those things. You know, just your past is your past. But when you meet him at the well, whatever you are, whoever you are, it's enough. It's enough.
That's powerful. Okay. Yeah, I think the glorious gospel is that Jesus plus nothing. It's not Jesus plus me or Jesus plus my good works, because they're filthy rags anyway.
Right.
Isaiah 64:6, he really nails it there. But really, just I love what you're saying, because we can collapse and surrender into his arms, and then really our priorities change and our thinking changes. And I love this verse. One of my favorite verses says, he will lift the beggar from the ash heap and set him upon a throne. 1 Samuel 2:8, like the beggar from the ash heap. Like, really, we're all there. We're all there. We just have less of an ash heap than others, but he lifts us up, and he makes all things new. And our past doesn't have to define us. Our sin doesn't have to define us. But really, it's Lord, make this real. Like, I want to go beyond the measurable into the immeasurable. And then the Word of God becomes food for us. And when we come to the church, and it's an interesting day, I've got to be honest, in the church where people kind of are selective hearers, maybe, or picking out what they want. But if we come to hear the Lord, the hard sayings may save our lives, actually. And to be faithful to a local assembly is such a beautiful gift in our life. And to have a pastor teacher is really a tremendous gift in our lives. But just that the Word would be something that would be an open hand that would lead us. Because you mentioned leaders earlier. It's like we cannot be a leader unless we're first a humble follower. Because where are we going to lead people to, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've got to be humble first. That was certainly the lesson from my dear friend. You know, she was just a wonderful person. But I want to go back for a second about trials and difficulties. And what I want to share with our listeners, and I invite you to share about this as well, you know, sometimes it's a matter of perspective. Things that, sometimes when we're going through something, it just seems like it's taking forever and it's weighing us down and, this will never end. And then it ends, and when we look back, we say, oh, that wasn't so bad. Oh, I made it through that. And so sometimes it's, recognizing that it may not be comfortable at that moment, but, first of all, Christ invited us to give us the burden, and take his, because he said his was light. He would do, there's that trade again, where he says, you can give me yours, just take my yoke upon you, my burden is light. But when you're able to shift your perspective, and look, I heard a pastor give this wonderful story one time about perspective, and he said he was on an elevator with his daughter. She was very, very young at the time, and the elevator got very, very crowded, and she was a little girl, and so she was, at everybody's belt buckle level. And what she said was, "Pick me up, Daddy. I don't like the view down here." And what he went on to say was, we can say the same thing to God, when we're going through a trial. Because he said when you're looking down from a problem, it's, like little ants. It's not a big deal. It's when you're looking up at it that it just seems so monumental. And so his advice was for us to say to God, "Pick me up, Daddy. I don't like the view down here," which I think is a wonderful way of reminding us that trials are temporary. It's all temporary. My grandmother used to say, and I've been thinking about her a lot lately, and her saying, she had a million of them. She would always say to me, "Carol, wear it all like a loose garment, so that those things don't, they don't come to where you actually live. They're not on you. It's just a loose garment, So, we've got about 4 minutes left. I'm so sorry. We were supposed to take a break. This has been amazing. This has been an amazing conversation with you, Pastor Jason, and I really, really appreciate the depth that you have taken us in this conversation today. So in our last few moments, because we're just all, I'm just all over the place today, but I'm just loving what you have shared and how you have invited, and I think I really needed this conversation myself, but how you have invited us to find our place in God and to find who we are and to operate from that. I just invite you to share in our closing minutes. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. I just want you to share with our listeners whatever you would like to share, whatever you would like for us to know as we finish up for the day.
Wow, this has been a blessing for me as well. Thanks so much for having me. I just to say that maybe people are listening that may have doubts and questions, and I think those are good if they lead us deeper and lead us closer to the Lord. I think there's a place where God uses those things so that we are hungry for more. And I am encouraged today to say that the mystery helps life make more sense. It sounds a little cryptic there, but in these places where we need God, as we focus on Him, as we feed on Him, as we fellowship with Him, it brings in communion, and we begin to enjoy our life. We begin to live in the moments, celebrating everything, every meeting with God, and that there's nothing wasted, and everything can be redeemed as we follow hard after the Lord. And this is just an encouragement to all of us, is that there is so much meaning that we can tap into. And as we give Him our heart, as we cry out in an honest way, I think that's really maybe a very simple statement, but if we cry out with an honest heart in transparency and we're waiting on him and we're vulnerable, God conscious, not self-conscious, then God will so patiently, like a father, show us how much we are valued, how much we are loved, how much we have an incredible purpose in this day and age we live in. So this is an inexhaustible topic.
Oh, absolutely. We easily could have gone another hour or two. So that means I'll have to invite you back again, very, very soon, so that we can, explore a bit more. But I think this topic is timely. We're living in a time, you mentioned it earlier, where there's so many changes, and, things are so rapid. You can find any information that you want basically about anybody or anything in less than 2 seconds on Google, and, social media has made the world so much smaller. You can talk to people in China and India and any place else, like you and I are talking right now. But it's heartening to know that in this world where everything is so topsy-turvy, God never changes.
Mm.
He's the same God yesterday, today, and forever. And what he has said, you can, as one pastor puts it, you can put your foot on it. You can rely on that word. He said he's the first and the last, the Alpha and Omega, the author and the finisher, the beginning and the end. And so with that, I invite our listeners to find in him that stability that you're looking for. Find in him that rock that you need, because things are so uncertain. Every 5 minutes there's breaking news, and, our attention spans are getting shorter. There's a study done that we now have the attention span less than a goldfish, which is 8 seconds. So, just rest in him, look to him. And, Pastor Jason, I just want to thank you for bringing a right now word, a word that I know has blessed a lot of people today. It certainly blessed me. And with your permission, I will post on my Tea Time page, I'd be more than happy to post a link to your blog, so folks who want to read, live in the meaning would be able to take advantage of that, because we didn't even get through half of it. We kind of skittered on to other topics. But I really, 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 if that's okay, I'd be more than happy to post that. But I'm very pleased that you were able to join us today. And to our listeners, I want to thank you for joining us. And remember, everything you want is on the other side of fear. So I'm asking and want you to be blessed today. We will be back next Saturday with another guest, and but we're going to have Pastor Jason back real soon, because this is like really good stuff. And we'll see you again 4 o'clock Eastern every Saturday. This is Tea Time with Carol. Be blessed. Bye-bye.